Hi everybody, it's Senpai Fanfics back at it with another amazing content. What if Deku owned a flower shop? If you guys would like to see more videos like this in the future, hit the subscribe button and notifications on for more videos like this. Thank you to the creator of the fanfic, which will be linked below. Let's start it. We've all had crushes that just couldn't be helped before. Or well, maybe helpless is a better way to put it. You know the kind, they're way out of your league, you've never even spoken to them, and you can't get them out of your brain no matter how many times you try. You've been there before, right? Maybe with that popular guy in your math class or even your favorite celebrity. But trust me, this is much worse. Why? Well, you try having a crush on the #1 pro hero and not go mad. It was impossible. It was stupid. He was gorgeous and kind and amazing and smart. Asagao hated it. Maybe it made things worse that literally every other 20-something in Japan, if not the whole world, also had a thing for Deku. But who wouldn't with those strong arms, bright eyes, and smile that could light up the worst moments of people's lives? He drew you in. He drew everyone in. There was always some new rumor to be heard. Was he dating his high school sweetheart, Uravati? Was his smile a little friendlier than usual toward his new sidekick? He'd gone out to that new boba place with Froppy a few days ago. Were they a thing? The tabloids ate it up, as did the people, present company included. Nope, won't do it, Asa told herself. The magazine on the rack held promises of new salacious details on Deku's secret romance. It was tempting, but not what she came here for. After staring at the enticing picture for 1 second too many, how did the photographers always manage to catch him shirtless? Asagao turned her attention to the wedding magazine section. She picked up the latest ones, stacked them neatly into the crook of her arm, and forced herself to leave. If she stayed any longer, her hand would have picked up the Deku magazine without her realizing it. As she walked up to the front of the store to pay, more magazines flashed his face all around her. She distracted herself by twirling her brown locks with her finger and looking down at what she'd collected. She flipped open to the pages on flower arrangements, then fought back a groan. Why is it always hydrangeas? She internally grumbled. Hydrangeas were much more finicky than other flowers. All the petals drove her quirk crazier than usual. But alas, she had a reputation to uphold. Her arrangements had become popular because she kept up with the times, not because she fussed over which flowers were harder to make than others. As the line to the cash register slowly shuffled forward, Asa's mind drifted to her schedule for the day. Her first bride-to-be was coming in at 11, followed by one on the hour each hour until 5. She might have a small break around 3, since she knew that appointment was just another double-check on the color schemes, so it shouldn't take as long as the other consultations. She could probably get one of her girls to cover if she needed to take a break. They wouldn't be able to tend to her flowers like she did, they just didn't have the quirk for it. She knew they'd manage, though. When she finally reached the cashier, Asa's light violet eyes caught sight of the same magazine yet again. She must have stared at it for too long, because she soon heard the sound of the attendant chuckling. "Haven't read it yet?" they asked. Asa jumped. "I'm sorry?" The woman, maybe in her late 40s, shook her head in amusement. "Every girl your age has been snatching it up like crazy. Every magazine is Deku this, Deku that these days. If you ask me, I think it's all nonsense, but hey, it sells." Asa nodded absent-mindedly. Yeah, they do." She missed the almost pitying smile the woman was giving her now. "Ah, but that's celebrities for you, always have everyone chasing after them." "That'll be 1552, please." The flower shop owner handed over her card, and moments later was waving goodbye, her fingers still itching to grab the tabloid as she left. If there was one word Asa could use to express her feelings about her crush on Deku, it was annoying. She remembered how it first felt, seeing him on the news and being in awe. She was 18, and he was 20. He had just saved at least 50 people from an office building on fire, and instead of stopping to answer the reporters' incessant questions, he'd just smiled and waved before he took off back into the building. She could remember the way her heart swooned like it was yesterday. It hadn't taken long for her crush to grow, and it had continued to do so steadily ever since. Asa would admit she had more than a few of his merchandise items, but she only ever wore them in her apartment. After all, it would be a little weird for a 22-year-old business owner to wear a green Deku Odyssey in her shop. Yeah, for years was a long time for a heart to chase after someone, impossible. She knew she should give it up. That's why she was trying her best to no longer buy all those stupid magazines. The lady at the store was probably right when she said they only contained garbage. For someone so bright in the spotlight, Deku was also rather private. The likelihood that anyone had anything figured out about his love life was next to zero. Asa shook her head. Great, she was thinking about him. Again. She wanted to curse that first news story that drew her in. Maybe if she hadn't watched it, she wouldn't have wasted time fantasizing so much the last few years. At least the rest of her walk to the store was peaceful. It was a rather quiet morning for Tokyo. Spring was slowly fading into summer, bringing some much-needed warmth. While she could tend to her flowers easily, the extra sunlight was always helpful. She turned the street corner, and a pastel pink building front popped out on the horizon. A smile made its way onto Asa's face. Work would be good for her today. It would distract her from all these useless thoughts about a man whose beautiful green eyes she would never get to see up close. I really am a lost cause, she groaned. When she arrived at her shop's doorstep, she was pleasantly surprised to see that the lights had already been turned on. She walked through the door, and the little bell above jingled. "I'll be with you in a second," came the call from the back storeroom. Asa laughed. "It's just me, Akari." The college student popped out from behind a door. "Ah. Hi, Asa-san." "Morning," the shop owner replied. She set her stuff on the counter, spreading the bridal magazines out for samples. "New stuff to look at. Anyone in so far?" Akari hopped over, her eyes glittering with excitement, or her quirk, sometimes it was hard to tell. "Oh wow. I love hydrangeas," she squealed. Asa rolled her eyes, and Akari's cheer suddenly turned to faux disgust. "I mean, darn, they're so difficult." "Oh no." Asa couldn't help but snort as she made her way around the counter. "Ha ha, very funny. I'll just have to make time for extra." "You have the register?" The slightly younger woman nodded her head enthusiastically, pink hair flying. "You go do your thing. I'll let you know if I need help." With a thumbs up, Asa moved toward the back room. As soon as she walked in and shut the door, she sighed happily. All around her were rows and rows of her flowers, each one happily drinking up the sunlight pouring in through the glass ceiling. "Hello, darlings," Asa greeted. "How is everyone today?" A contented musical hum began to stir through the flowers, making her grin. "Excellent. Glad to hear it. Anyone needing help?" A sad ping whispered to her from the back of the room. Asa made her way toward it, all the while humming softly. Her music mingled with that of the flowers, caressing each petal gently. She sensed them perk up a bit more. When Asa arrived at the flower in need, she scared. "Always you, Miss Daisy," she sighed. "What is it with your petals this year?" The little flower keened mournfully, almost like a whimper. Asa leaned down and hummed louder. She watched as the daisy's dull yellow center began to brighten, followed quickly by the white petals stretching out toward her. She gave in to the silent request and tickled the flower's stem. A giggle came from it, and she smiled. "There you go, girl. Better?" She received a flit of warmth in response. Satisfied with her troublesome daisy, which honestly, it might just have wanted attention and had been feigning illness, wouldn't be the first time, Asa moved on to the rest of the group. She wandered through the greenhouse row by row, humming soothingly and ensuring that all was well. 30 minutes later, Asa finally exited the greenhouse and went back up to the front. She needed to refuel her quirk, not to mention get ready for her first client of the day. Akari looked back as soon as she heard the door open behind the counter. "Everyone okay?" Asa nodded and began to check on the flowers she had on display. "Daisy's throwing a fit again, but she'll be all right. Anyone come in so far?" A few orders for next week, Akari shrugged. Nothing I couldn't handle. I'm gonna miss this place after graduation, she sighed. After humming to a few slightly wilted roses, Asa shook her head. You know you're always welcome back here. You can even keep up a few shifts if you can't find a job immediately. The college girl perked up. You're just the best boss ever, you know that, she beamed. The shopkeeper shrugged. I know it's tough out there, and you've been a hard worker. It's going to be difficult to find someone to replace you once you're gone. Who knows, maybe I'll go into business with you? Akari suggested. Split it 49-51 so you still have the control. What do you think? Asa laughed. You come up with the capital, and we'll see. As per usual, the day passed in a flurry of flowers and flustered fiancés. Asa couldn't complain. Sure, she had a completely useless crush on the #1 hero, but that didn't make her bitter about helping other women get ready for their big day. If anything, it was soothing. Using her quirk, something she had thought was rather useless as a child, was therapeutic. Plus, it did help that her quirk made her own of one of the most popular flower shops in Tokyo. Having flowers that lasted longer than anyone else's had its advantages. It was tiring, however. Keeping her quirk refueled by eating ridiculous amounts of fresh produce was a pain, and when the final bubbly bride-to-be left her shop at 6, Asa was exhausted. That break at 3 hadn't been able to happen. A massive family looking to surprise their mother for her birthday had filed in, each sibling having a request more ridiculous than the other. Her brain foggy from overusing her quirk, Asa slipped into the back room to grab an apple from her supply. That should hold her over for the walk home, at least, and give her enough energy to lock up the store. Akari had already gone home an hour ago, anyways, so it wasn't like she had much of a choice. She flopped down on a chair next to a patch of lilies, munching on her apple slowly. I just want to go home, eat a salad the size of a bush, and re-watch Deku interviews, she thought. It took a few moments before she realized where her mind had wound up, and Asa slapped herself lightly. No more dangerous impossible crush thoughts. She had to stop it. It had been for years. Let it go. Thankfully, the sound of the bell at the front of the door caught her mind's attention before it could wander again. Crap, I forgot to change the sign to closed, she muttered. Better go see who it was. A customer was a customer, after all. It'd be stupid of her to ignore a source of financial income. Making sure the last bite of her apple had been swallowed, Asa threw the core into a trash can and wiped her sticky hands on her jeans. Stupid apples and their juice. She'd just have to avoid shaking the customer's hand. Asa let out a sigh as she stood and made her way to the door. She could do this. Sure, she was tired, but she could put on a smile. Just one more customer, and she'd be done for the day. Determination set in her mind, Asa pushed the door open and she swore her heart stopped. There in the middle of the room, looking far too natural amidst the sea of greenery that was her shop, stood none other than the #1 pro hero of her dreams. His attention then landed on her, and like the angel she'd always heard he smiled brightly. Oh, hey there. Are you the owner? I was hoping to buy a bouquet, and I heard this was the best place to come. Nope. This wasn't happening. She wasn't seeing him. She was just tired, her quirk was worn out, and she was imagining things. Nope. Not today. But then he was wandering over to one of her best arrangements in the corner near the front window, seemingly not bothered by her lack of a response. I think I like this one a lot. How long would it take to have it made? The normalcy of the question seemed to snap Asa out of her daze. Oh, the chrysanthemums? Just a few minutes. They can be a little temperamental, but I can make it quick. His smile brightened even more. How was that possible? He was shining like the sun? Is that part of his quirk? Were his eyes sparkling? What was happening? That'd be perfect. Deku said. I like these colors as they are, unless you have any other options you could show me. He was walking toward the counter now, the bouquet in hand. Was her heart racing? Was it hot in here? Was she even breathing? Oh gosh, he was right in front of her. Deku laughed awkwardly, scratching the back of his head with his free hand. I don't really know much about flowers, so I'll take the expert's advice. She blinked. Right. Her. That was her. She was the expert. He was the customer. Okay. Right. Yes. Nope. Nope, this was still weird. Asa swore she could hear all the flowers around her snickering. It seemed to do the trick to bring her back to reality. Well, that color combination is really popular for this time of year, but I can always do anything else you like. Wow, how was her voice so steady? Asa reached for a binder beneath the counter, bringing it up and flipping to the page featuring chrysanthemums. I have all of these colors available, and I can add anything else you see in the book and just calculate the cost from there. Was this happening? Was she really speaking with Deku, the #1 pro hero, about flowers? Seriously? Why yes she was, as evident by how he was now humming and tapping a finger to his mouth. I like the pink ones, maybe do those instead of the orange, so then it's the yellow and the pink. What do you have that's green that we could add? An amused laugh slipped out before she could stop it. There are green chrysanthemums, too, she pointed. Right there, bottom of the page. Whoops, didn't see that, Deku chuckled. Were his cheeks a little flushed? Maybe it was warm in here. She should go check the thermostat. He stared at the page for at least another minute in silence, the loudest silence Asa had ever heard in her life, what with all her flowers taunting her, before he looked up and grinned awkwardly. May I defer to your opinion again? Millimeter, Hypericum berries come in green, she suggested, and wow, this was really happening, like she was flipping through to another page to show Deku, her greenery selection, and this was totally normal. Yep, normal as normal could be. Those are perfect, he nodded excitedly. Those, let's do those. With the numbers for pricing already running through her head, Asa snapped the binder shut and started back toward the greenhouse. I'll go put it together, feel free to look around. I'll be back in about 5 minutes. Deku smiled. She swore she was going to go blind. Thanks. Asa smiled back politely, walked through the door, and immediately fell back against the wall. Nope. Enuhi. This wasn't happening. Things like this didn't happen. She was about to put together a flower arrangement. For Deku. 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 Breathe, she told herself. Just get it done. Get the flowers. Make them pretty. Get the money. Go home. Eat. Fall asleep. Pretend this didn't happen. Yeah, she could do that. Asa set about her work in a daze, ignoring all the teasing from her flowers as she walked by. They clearly knew something was up, it was obvious by the weird, out-of-tune song she was humming. But she ignored them all, gathering the very best of her chrysanthemums and Hypericum berries into her prettiest paper wrapping, because of course, she was going to choose the very best, and no, she was not going to charge him extra for it. Once a silk ribbon had been tied around the neck of the flowers, Asa huffed out a breath. Go back in there. Give him the flowers. Be done for the day. She could do this. She was a capable adult human being. Asa stared at the door. Crap, this was hard. After one more deep breath, she passed through to the shop. He was still there. This time, he was investigating a different, much more complex arrangement filled with orchids and baby's breath. She also noted that he had set the original bouquet back in its proper place. The sound of the back room door got his attention, though, and he looked over at her with those stupidly stunning green eyes again. Her heart skipped a beat. Oh wow, he laughed breathlessly, practically running up to the counter. It's beautiful. Thank you so much, it's perfect. What were words? She didn't know. She didn't have any right now. Asa started to hand the flowers over, but froze the second before his fingers brushed the paper. Wait! Oh, sorry, forgot the last step, This was it. She needed to do it now, or else she knew what would happen. The moment the flowers passed from her care to someone else's, the life force between them began to fade. She had to give them one final push. She'd never felt so embarrassed to do her job in her entire career. Deku was blinking at her curiously, but he stepped back to give her space. She managed probably the most awkward smile of her life before she lifted her hand. Asa let her fingers trail gently over each petal, humming softly to herself as she did. Her face felt bright red. She suddenly remembered how uncomfortable it used to make her the first few times she did this in front of customers. She'd gotten over that quickly, but now, with Deku's eyes on her, suddenly her quirk felt incredibly silly. When Asa was finished, she didn't dare look at him, opting to hand the bouquet over as quickly as possible and immediately turn her attention to the register. Those will last as is for about 2 weeks, give or take a few days based on the conditions they're in, she told him like he was just any other customer, which he was, but no he wasn't. It'll be 45.28. She forced herself to look up at him and watched as he fumbled around with the bouquet, tucking it in the crook of his arm as he reached into his pocket for his wallet. Asa made sure their fingers didn't touch when he handed over a credit card. She didn't think her heart could take it, especially with how Deku was looking at her with his head tilted curiously. "So I'm guessing some sort of gardening quirk?" he asked. When Asa blinked at him, he put his hands up. "I mean, you don't have to tell me, I just like studying different quirks a lot, and I haven't really run into anyone with yours before. Well, there was this one girl in school with vines for hair, but I don't remember her having any powers related to flowers." Asa blinked again. Wow, so he really was like that. She'd read about how much Deku loved quirks, she even knew about some of the research he'd assisted in at Island. Still, it was, well, she didn't know what it was like to be on the receiving end of it. Honestly, she still wasn't even sure if she was breathing. "It's called flower talk," she found herself replying as she ran the transaction. "It's one of those quirks that kinda seems useless at first, but starting this business is really the best thing I could have ever asked for. Along with you walking in here." Deku grinned and shook his head. "I don't think it's useless at all. Every quirk is good for something, and it's awesome that you're using it like this. I'm sure you get to make so many people happy with your flowers, and that's really something special." How was she not on the floor right now? Maybe he sensed how overwhelmed his compliment had made her, because he took his credit card back from her frozen hand and chuckled awkwardly. "Anyways, sorry to bother you right as the store was about to close. I really appreciate it." "It's no problem." Asa stammered. "No problem at all, really. I'd be an idiot if I turned away the #1 pro hero. Crap. Dang it. No." She'd let it slip. And now she looked like a total fangirl. Which, yes, she was, and yes, he probably also assumed that everybody recognized him, but she'd wanted this to be normal. As normal could be. Asa didn't know what she expected, for him to frown, walk out without another word, sigh, something. But no, he didn't do any of those things. Instead, Deku just smiled even more. "You didn't know it was me when I walked in, though, so I still appreciate it. Nakono-san, is it?" Hearing her name come from his lips made her jump. How did he? Right. The sign out front. Her shop was named after her. Get it together, Asagao. Asa managed a nod. Nakono Asagao. Nice to meet you. He bowed a little. Midoriya Izuku. Nice to meet you, too, Nakono-san. Yeah, I kinda know who you are, she blurted before she could stop herself. Yeah, I figured, Deku laughed, and he was scratching the back of his head again. Did he not realize how cute it was when he did that? Are they still talking? Why are they still talking? But it'd be rude of me to not introduce myself, he shrugged. He was moving away from her now, heading toward the exit. Deku stopped just before the door and turned back to wave. Thank you again, he called out with that never-ending smile. The flowers are just what I needed. And with the tinkling of the shop bell, he was gone. Asa wasn't sure how long she stood there. She only remembers whispering to an empty room, "What the crap?" How was she not on the floor right now? Maybe he sensed how overwhelmed his compliment had made her, because he took his credit card back from her frozen hand and chuckled awkwardly. "Anyways, sorry to bother you right as the store was about to close. I really appreciate it." "It's no problem," Asa stammered. "No problem at all, really. I'd be an idiot if I turned away the #1 pro hero." "Crap. Dang it. No." She'd let it slip. She'd let it slip, and now she looked like a total fangirl. Which, yes, she was, and yes, he probably also assumed that everybody recognized him, but she'd wanted this to be normal. As normal could be. Asa didn't know what she expected, for him to frown, walk out without another word, sigh, something. But no, he didn't do any of those things. Instead, Deku just smiled even more. "You didn't know it was me when I walked in, though, so I still appreciate it. Nakono-san, is it?" Hearing her name come from his lips made her jump. How did he? Right. The sign out front. Her shop was named after her. "Get it together, Asagao." Asa managed a nod. "Nakono Asagao. Nice to meet you." He bowed a little. "Midoriya Izuku. Nice to meet you, too, Nakono-san." "Yeah, I kinda know who you are," she blurted before she could stop herself. "Yeah, I figured," Deku laughed, and he was scratching the back of his head again. Did he not realize how cute it was when he did that? Are they still talking? Why are they still talking? But it'd be rude of me to not introduce myself, he shrugged. He was moving away from her now, heading toward the exit. Deku stopped just before the door and turned back to wave. "Thank you again," he called out with that never-ending smile. "The flowers are just what I needed." And with the tinkling of the shop bell, he was gone. Asa wasn't sure how long she stood there. She only remembers whispering to an empty room, "What the crap?" Though her daydreams certainly hadn't, Asa was pretty convinced she had all but forgotten about the day her celebrity crush had stood in her flower shop 2 weeks ago. It had been a complete coincidence, and a complete honor, like, wow, but it had happened and now it was done. She'd freaked out over it, talked with her best friend Hannah about it, fantasized about him coming back to ask for her number, and moved on. There was only one question she didn't let herself linger on: who were the flowers for? Every time the thought popped into her head, her heart stung and she pushed it aside. Why did she care? It didn't matter that he was getting flowers for someone. Pink flowers. Pretty pink flowers. For someone. Probably a pretty someone. Asa shook her head and groaned. This was bad. Focus, Asa, focus. Get over this stupid crush. None of this matters. But what if the magazines were right? Nope, she told herself as she tried to read over the same client email for the 50th time. Bad Asa. We are not going down this rabbit trail again. Go put your flowers together and distract yourself. But his eyes. Wow, you're really out of it, aren't you, Asa-chan? Asa spun around. Hana-chan. Her best friend had her arms crossed and eyes narrowed as she walked up to the counter. You haven't said whether you're coming tonight or not, Hana accused. Figured I'd stop by and make you give me an answer. Asa gave a guilty smile. Sorry, you know how this season is, multiple weddings every weekend, and superheroes you're expecting to pop back up again? Hana finished. When the florist's eyes flickered down, she sighed. I thought you were getting over him, Asa-chan. Come on, a night out would do you some good, get you out of this shop for once. Asa grumbled, I'm not always in the shop, you know. Hana rolled her eyes. Your apartment doesn't count. The two stared at each other in a standoff. At least there weren't any customers in right now. The last thing Asa needed was for any of them to hear about all this. She hadn't told anyone other than Hana about what had happened. How could she? Something about blabbing just rubbed her the wrong way. She wanted to be respectful of him. Hero or not, he was a human, too. Deku deserved privacy, and she wasn't about to go gossiping about how he was in her shop. Hana's blazing green eyes were still striking daggers into her heart, though, and Asa groaned, "Fine, when and where?" "That new American restaurant down the road," Hana replied, a frustratingly pleased twinkle in her eyes. 6 o'clock. Hideaki-kun will be there. He's been asking about you. Asa snorted. Sure he has? The amused look on Hana's face melted a little. Asa-chan, you're a great catch. And he's a good guy. I know you two had that weird thing, but you were second years. He really has been bugging me to get you to come. I think he's serious this time. The shopkeeper let out a sigh. Yeah. I'll be there, okay? I'll just be late, shop closes at 6, you know. Hana grinned. I'll save you a seat next to me. Want me to bring that cute jacket? Despite herself, Asa perked up. The one with the cherry blossom print? Yup. Deal. After giving Asa some directions to the restaurant, Hana made her way out of the shop, though not without threatening Asa if she didn't show up, of course. Asa shook her head. Hana was just doing what she thought was best, after all. She knew Asa had been driving herself a bit crazy lately with the business. It was hard not to, honestly. For once in her life, Asa felt like she truly had a purpose, it's just that sometimes that amazing feeling made her overwork herself. Reuniting with old friends from high school would be good, though. It would bring back some fond, pre-Deku crush memories. Of course he popped into her brain again. And maybe seeing Hideaki wouldn't be so bad. Maybe a little awkward at first, but she could handle it. Asa took in a deep breath, then let it out slowly. She could handle it. She had always been capable of handling things. Well, except for obsessive thoughts about a certain green-haired hero, but nope, not today. She had a bride-to-be coming in for an appointment in 2 minutes, and she was not going to let herself be distracted. Off in La La Land again? Asa jumped and spun around to see her other employee, Maiko, giving her a fond look. Are you getting enough sleep, Ene-chan? She questioned. The florist fought the urge to roll her eyes at the cutesy nickname. I think you forget I'm older than you sometimes, she replied dryly. 2 years, Maiko shrugged. And I think you forget to take care of yourself sometimes. Go grab something to eat in the back. I'll greet Tanaka-san. Whatever she did to deserve such wonderful employees, Asa would never know. Asa nodded, yep, and if they don't last that long, let me know. It's rare that they don't last as long as I promise, but a promise is a promise, and I've had to do refunds before in special cases. I'm sure they'll be fine. Deku shook his head good-naturedly. The other ones only just started wilting, but I was just so excited to get more. And she, well, it was, really nice to have fresh flowers. There seemed to be some unspoken agreement to not mention his slip-up. Even so, Asa couldn't deny how her heart had stopped. Deku's smile turned a little sheepish, and he scratched the back of his head. Anyways, I should get out of your way. I kept you open late again. All she could do was say, it's okay. He laughed, right. There was a pause, during which the two just looked at each other. Then he started toward the exit. Asa blinked. Did their eyes connect just a bit longer than what could be considered normal? Was she breathing? Had that been awkward? Did he feel weird now? All these questions and more swirled around her head so violently that she barely noticed him walk to the door. Until the bell above it rang, of course. She startled back to reality. Thanks, again, Nakano-san. Deku called from the half-open door. Another cheerful wave and a flash of that absurdly bright jacket later, he was gone. What just happened? Asagao sighed. Something told her she wasn't going to be able to fall asleep easily tonight. She set about closing the shop in a dazed leisurely pace, her mind spinning with curiosity. There was one thing for certain, these flowers really were for someone special. That much was obvious. His entire bouquet was filled with love. He'd specifically asked for love. And yet there wasn't a single rose. Roses were classic. Asa went through more of them than she could count each week. Boyfriends and husbands and fiancés came in to grab them all the time, each of them always wearing a bashful grin on their face. But Deku didn't buy roses. Well, he could have. She could have thrown them in the bouquet, but he hadn't requested them in his original idea in the first place. Not only that, but he came in right at closing time again. Asagao wasn't an idiot, she could figure it out pretty easily. A celebrity like him coming to get flowers was prime material for any gossip magazine, not to mention arriving at a time like that lessened the likelihood that he'd run into any of her other customers. Seemed all the tabloids were right when they said Deku liked privacy. She would keep it that way, Asa decided. Perhaps she would consider telling Maiko and Akari so they wouldn't have a heart attack in case Deku ever showed up at a different time. But for now, she'd keep it on the down low, especially given how weird he acted after letting that certain detail slip. It was his life, and he deserved to not have anyone butting in on it. Should I tell Hana-chan about him stopping in again? Asa wondered as she took off her apron. Meh, I'll think on it. Asagao flicked off the shop lights, locked the doors, and stepped out onto the street where Deku had been not too long ago. Hey, that was a weird thought. He'd just been here. She swore she still felt some sort of energy in the air, that enthusiastic optimism he always carried with him. And then, Asa took out her phone. That was a mistake. Hana, did you bail? I brought the jacket just for you. You're gonna break Hideyoki-kun's heart. Asa squinted at the text. A second later, her eyes finally drifted to the time. 6:22 p.m. Hana was going to kill her. Asa began speed walking toward the restaurant at breakneck speed. Asa, had a last-minute customer, pretty please order me a large salad? You know what I like. You're the best. Hana, you're lucky I'm a good friend. I'll order it with extra celery. The florist laughed out loud at her friend's text. Being on time had never been a strong suit of Asa's, anyways, something that Hana was far too familiar with at this point to get mad. Still, Asa had to admit Hana was right. She was very lucky for a friend like her. The restaurant wasn't far. Asa had her lucky stars to thank for that, as well as another visit from Deku. Seriously, what was happening lately? No surprise, Hana was waiting at the door with the promised jacket in hand when Asa arrived. Thanks, Asa sighed, slipping it over her plain black jeans and white shirt. At least she now looked semi-cute for this random high school reunion. Salad will be out soon, Hana said, shaking her head as she led Asa over to the group table. Everyone else already has their food. Don't you have a clock on the wall in your shop? Asa smiled guiltily. Yeah, I just got distracted. The person had a custom order, and it took longer than usual. You know I can't turn people away. You're too nice, Hana claimed with an eye roll. If only she knew who Asa had been with 20 minutes ago. Hey! You made it! Hideyoki was waving at her from the table. Black hair, broad shoulders, and a kind smile on a face that she supposed was attractive. He hadn't changed a bit. Hana not so subtly nudged her toward the empty seat next to him. It was the only spot left, so honestly she had no choice. This would be okay. It couldn't get too awkward, right? You look great, Hideyoki said as she sat down. Hana-chan said the shop drives you crazy, but you sure don't show it. Asa smiled politely. I'll take crazy because it means paying the bills. What are you up to these days? He leaned back in his chair. Oh, you know, taking over the family business from my dad, Hideyoki shrugged. Not exactly what I had in mind for life, but I'll get my own adventure one day. It's weird how much time has passed, isn't it? Sometimes I swear we're all still 16. A waiter sat her salad down in front of her, and for the third time in only the last 5 minutes, Asa again thanked her lucky stars. This small talk was already more than she felt like dealing with. Maybe refueling her quirk would help. And as it turned out, it only continued to get more uncomfortable. She barely got a word into any of her other old high school friends, what with how Hideyoki seemed far too determined to catch up on the last 5 years of their lives. Worst of all, Hana was too busy chatting with everyone else to notice Asa's subtle looks for help. As Hideyoki walked her home, he'd insisted since it was getting dark out, Asagao couldn't help but internally sigh. It wasn't his fault, after all. Hideyoki was a genuinely nice guy. But his hair didn't have green tips, and his eyes were dull brown instead of brilliant emerald. And his smile was nice, but it didn't light up a room. Not to mention, she just didn't really feel attracted to him that way anymore. He didn't draw her in, not like a different certain someone. A billboard with Deku's face plastered on it came up on the horizon when they took a turn toward her apartment building. Speak of the devil, Asa groaned. Why couldn't she get him out of her head? Actually, she found she didn't mind Deku invading her brain right now. It was a welcome distraction from the increasingly awkward silence between the exes. At least they were almost to her building. So Asa-chan, Hideyoki started. Weird. Even hearing her first name from his lips didn't give her the same reaction as Deku's formal usage. I've been thinking about things lately, and well. She raised an eyebrow at him. Things? You and me, he clarified, then coughed. Looking back, I can't really figure out why we didn't work. I still think a lot of you, so I was wondering if maybe you wanted to go out sometime? They stopped in front of her building door. She stared up at him, her head tilted. When the silence went on for too long, Hideyoki laughed. I know, that kinda came out of nowhere. Would you be willing to give it a shot? Asa blinked. I'm in love with a person who's way out of my reach. A person that no one could ever compare to. You're a great guy. You deserve someone who's actually going to pay attention to you instead of obsessing over someone else. Please don't be upset with me. I'm so sorry, Hideyoki-kun. I'm just too busy with the shop right now for something like that. The disappointment on his face was clear as day. That's what Hana-chan said you'd say, he sighed. Asa smiled sadly. You deserve someone who can give you the time of day, not someone who shows up to dinner super late. I didn't mind, Hideyoki shrugged. She frowned. Hideyoki. I know, he shook his head. Just figured I should give it a try. See you around? Yeah, Asa nodded. See you. Hideyoki turned and walked away without another word. The slump in his shoulders told her everything she needed to know, but even then, she couldn't convince herself that she'd made the wrong choice. She knew how messy her heart was right now. Stringing him along would only make things worse. Yep, that's me, saying no to a great guy while the guy I actually want is buying flowers for some mystery girl, she grumbled as she walked up the stairs. At least it was already time to go to bed. Hideyoki had chatted her ears off for 3 hours at the restaurant, and she was dead tired. Asa's prediction from before was right. Even with her quirk begging her for some shut-eye, she couldn't fall asleep. The other ones only just started wilting, but I was just so excited to get more. And she, well, it was, really nice to have fresh flowers. She. Who was she? Someone Deku loved. Someone who was definitely not her. Asa sighed and rolled over in bed. She wondered what it would be like to receive a bouquet filled with so much love from Deku, or even just anyone, for that matter. Yeah, she really needed to move on. Just go to sleep and try to forget about it again, she told herself. You'll drive yourself crazy if you don't get it out of your head. Deep B. Okay, well, not absolutely. It was mid-June, which meant she had at least 6 weddings each weekend to arrange flowers for. Maiko and Akari were working practically full-time to help her keep up, and she made sure to give them bonuses for the extra hours. So yes, the business was going well. It was just the fact that her heart and mind would start spinning out of control every spare second she got. Who were the flowers for? Why was he insistent upon keeping up a 2-week schedule? Would he ask for roses this time? If she was trying to get over her Deku obsession, this really wasn't helping. And today was the day. It was a Tuesday. He came in on Tuesdays. Asagao tried to tell herself that she wasn't jittery all day, but the look in Maiko's eyes told her otherwise. Sometimes that girl knew her too well. Or maybe it was just the mother hen instinct Maiko had. Miraculously, the florist got through all of her appointments without a hitch. Her last one even ended early, leaving her time to sit in the back and munch on a pear while she put together some lilies for a wedding this weekend. She was doing well, even with how her eyes kept flicking to the clock on the greenhouse wall. The minutes ticked by at an agonizingly slow pace, and it only seemed to get worse when the clock struck 5:30. She just wished it'd be 6 already. A knock sounded. "Ene-chan." Maiko called. "Yeah?" Her employee opened the door and peeked through it. "I'm heading home." "You okay for me to leave?" Asa waved a hand. "Get out of here. I already kept you later than usual." "Thanks, again, I know I've been asking a lot lately." Maiko smiled. "You know I don't mind." "Take care of yourself, Ene-chan." The shopkeeper hummed non-committally. A few moments later, she heard the doorbell ring, signaling that her employee had left. And then there was one. Asagao picked up her basket of lilies and made her way to the front of the store. She could finish the bouquets while waiting, and at least this way she'd be able to see Deku coming through the windows. Yup, just a normal, typical Tuesday night of waiting for the #1 pro hero to arrive at my shop, Asa thought. Not a big deal in any way, shape, or form. Hannah, who had been filled in on the events 2 weeks prior, claimed that Asa was in a state of denial. Which, no, of course she wasn't. She was acting like any other person who had been tossed into a weird reality of seeing their celebrity crush on a now semi-regular, scheduled basis. Asa knew that if cellophane started showing up at Hannah's office building out of the blue, she'd react the same way. Against her better judgment, Asagao let her mind wander to what might happen tonight. Would he come in with another list? Would he get bashful again if he accidentally got something wrong? Was he going to be wearing something that would bring out his eyes? Who was she kidding? His eyes always stood out no matter what he wore. Asa sighed happily, the lilies in her hands forgotten. Though she was still definitely nervous, she also found that she felt a little more confident this time. Her readiness could be because she knew for sure that Deku was in fact coming in approximately 16 minutes now, but their last interaction hadn't been that bad. Okay, well, there was the awkwardness toward the end, but before that, she'd been speaking full normal human sentences. At this rate, maybe they'd be able to have an actual conversation, not just the typical small talk that came along with her business. Yeah, I can do this, Asa told herself. It's just another time seeing Deku. 10 minutes later, she was not sure she could do this. Her foot was tapping incessantly. She kept checking the clock on the wall every 30 seconds. The entire front of the store had already been dusted and swept and organized. The lilies were tucked away in their delivery box. Her heart felt like it was going to burst. Light violet eyes looked to the clock yet again. 5 minutes. Well, actually, maybe only 2, seeing as how he usually walked in right before closing. So really any minute now. Gosh, was she really ready for this? The anticipation was killing her. Breathe, Asa, she sighed aloud. He's a nice person. There's no need to be worried. A minute passed. Asagao kept her eyes peeled on the street outside her shop. Another minute went by. She began running through her appointments for the next day in her mind. A third minute ticked away. Asa checked her phone and scrolled through Instagram. Then another minute. And another. And another. When the florist finally forced herself to leave the shop at 6:32, she told herself that the hollow feeling in her chest was just because she needed dinner. No, her heart wasn't sinking. Her mind didn't feel numb from disappointment. She just needed to go home and refuel her quirk for the next day at work. During the dismal walk to her apartment building, her phone pinged. Hannah, did Prince Charming stop by? Asa sighed before she responded. Asa, no he didn't. Must be out there saving other damsels in distress. Hannah, boo, I'm sorry. Want me to come over? Asa, you bring the movie, I'll provide the ice cream. Hannah, be there in 20. The young woman couldn't help but smile. At least she had a best friend like Hannah. Who knew what she'd do without her in the middle of this Deku crisis? Ooh. Stupid crush. At least she could drown her sorrows in a bowl of ice cream. Considering the letdown of the previous night, Asagao woke up in high spirits. This was most likely due to Hannah ranting about how all men were dumb and not worth her time, anyways. While Asa didn't entirely agree, she did have to admit that their get-together worked like a charm. It brought her back to their high school days, the nights where they'd stuff their faces with sugar and grumble about the boys in their class for hours. It was nice to have some girl time after having her heart metaphorically stomped on. Honestly, she felt like she was on top of the world right now. Maybe Hannah was right. Nakono Asagao didn't need a man. She was a successful business owner at the ripe young age of 22. She had her whole life ahead of her, and some silly little crush was not going to stand in her way. And Asagao certainly didn't need to be driving herself crazy over this mysterious she. Whoever Deku had gotten those flowers for didn't affect her in any way whatsoever. Asa was practically marching down the sidewalk at this point. She was going to have a good day. No worries, no obsessing, no questions, no daydreaming. This whole thing was over. Oh, the irony. If Asagao thought she knew how this day was going to go down, she was dead wrong. Because of course, in this weird alternate reality she must have fallen into, there was someone waiting outside her shop door when she turned the street corner. And come on, you really think she didn't recognize him immediately even with that hat on? The florist literally stopped in her tracks. There was no denying it, it was Deku who was standing in front of her shop. Suddenly all of her previous thoughts left her mind. How she started walking again will always remain a mystery. And let's be clear, she wasn't a heavy stepper. But whether it was some sort of super hearing or just random chance, Deku turned to look at her right as she finished crossing the road. He waved, a guilty smile on his face. She could see relief in his eyes when she reached him. I may or may not have been chasing down a bank robber last night and lost track of time, Deku confessed. One of Asa's eyebrows lifted. Sounds like you need to get your priorities straight. Did she just make a joke? Wait. Was she flirting? No. She knows she did not just imply that coming to her flower shop was more important than capturing a robber. Nope, not at all. Well, whatever she just did made the pro-hero laugh. I really do, he chuckled. I figured I could catch you this morning before you had any people come in, so I didn't take up too much of your time. Asa shook her head. She took the shop keys out and unlocked the door. You act like you're not a customer like anyone else. None of my customers are a waste of my time. Especially you. She waved for him to step on in. There was a brief moment where he hesitated, his hand reaching to hold the door for her, but she made a shooing motion with her hands. As he passed through the doorway, she took a moment to admire his outfit. Plain black jeans, navy hat, a mint and cream striped t-shirt, and a crossbody messenger bag. His work bag? That would make sense. He was probably going to head straight for his agency after stopping off here. She should make this quick so he wasn't late, even though she wouldn't mind a sight like him sticking around. Crap, she'd just been checking him out, hadn't she? So, Asa cleared her throat. She walked into the store and let the door shut behind her, flicking the lights on as well. What'll it be today? Deku already had his phone out, pulling up the Notes app just like last time. I did my homework, he informed her happily. I want blue irises, snowdrops, and purple anemones. She walked around to the back of the counter, her eyes up in thought. Hope, the florist guessed. It would make sense, Deku had a way of radiating hope without realizing it. His eyes sparkled in affirmation. Yes. Asagao let out a laugh. Good job. You're lucky I have all those in stock. Ah, Deku grinned awkwardly. I should have considered that. I'll get it right one of these days. Shaking her head again, Asa began to head toward the door to the greenhouse. It's fine, really. I'll be back in a... Wait! The shopkeeper turned, nearly jumping out of her skin when she found the number 1 pro hero only a foot away. When did he? Ah, right. Super speed. And now he was pulling a notebook out of his bag? What was going on? Deku flipped to a page and took in a sharp breath. I've been wondering ever since I started coming here, but I didn't want to be a bother, and you're probably busy and have lots to do, but I've really been curious about how your quirk works, he rambled. Was his face turning pink? It's a lot to ask, I know. I've just never seen a quirk like yours, and I've been trying to research one similar to it, but they don't have the same components as yours with the humming and the ritual and all that. Asa blinked. You want to, don't you have to get to work? He shrugged. I'm not in a rush. It's my day off. He produced a pencil from his bag and tapped the notebook with it. I'd like to write some things down, if you don't mind. Quirk studies is a side hobby of mine, and I can't remember all the details on my own. Her mind was spinning. Deku wanted to study her quirk. Deku. The number 1 pro hero. He wanted to study her quirk. Why? Instead of voicing this, she tilted her head. Pro hero Deku gets days off? His excited grin somehow grew even more. Surprising, I know. You can call me by my actual name, by the way, he offered. Asa's eyes widened. Use his real name? He couldn't be serious. This was just too much all at once. If that's okay with you. Deku added on quickly. I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but it'd make things even, right? Unless you have a hero name I could call you by? Who hadn't imagined what their hero name would be at some point? She wasn't about to tell him the one from her childhood, though. Flower Princess was just so, nope, this situation was already hard enough without the added embarrassment. It's, well it isn't exactly part of a regular general studies course, so I'm afraid not, she stammered. Deku chuckled a bit, then fell silent. So this was it. She still hadn't given him a straight answer, and she knew he wasn't going to push past her into the greenhouse. He was waiting for a yes or no. And really, how could she say no to that face? Without further ado, Asagao went over to the counter and pulled out a set of gloves from a box. Rules of the greenhouse, she started, I'm the only one who can touch the flowers. Everyone else has to wear these. You included, Deku Midoriya-san. She felt like she was going to die. Did she seriously just use his name? Deku took the gloves from her unquestioningly. Same reason you don't immediately hand over the bouquet when you're done. She nodded. Yup. It's a little hard to explain. I have time, he replied readily. Then his green eyes widened. Not that I want to take up your time, though. This already means a lot to me, I really appreciate it. Asagao held in a sigh. Something about him was just bursting with energy, and yet at the same time, she could sense his eagerness was being held back by his sense of respect. It was, honestly, really adorable. Words were failing her, so Asa simply began walking toward the door. Deku followed, but before she opened it, she turned back to him and put a finger to her lips. He nodded. She pushed the door open gently, letting the emotional wave of greeting from her flowers wash over her slowly. Hello, dears, Asa whispered. I have someone new. Is that okay? There was a mixed reaction from the group. Her more shy ones signaled their usual hesitancy. Several flowers, however, particularly the sunflowers in the back, were already perking up. She knew why. Of course they'd be drawn to Deku like a magnet. The florist glanced back and found that the hero was furiously scribbling something down. After a moment of silence, Deku jolted a little, then gave an embarrassed grin. "Sorry, I should be paying better attention," he apologized. "So you can hear them, but can anyone else? Say you wanted a flower to speak to someone, could they?" Asa frowned in thought. "No, I've tried that before. They can't understand others either, but they are always drawn to people who share their characteristics," she explained. "Hence why I've brought you to the sunflowers. They want to meet you." Deku blinked, staring down at the selection of flowers. He reached a gloved hand forward to touch the petals. Upon contact, the sunflowers let out a delighted cheer, and Asagao burst out laughing. He jerked his hand back. "I'm so sorry. Are they upset?" A hand covering her mouth, she was quick to shake her head. No, I'm sorry, they just got really excited. You share a kindred spirit, and they know it. Flowers love being around people who are like them." The hero relaxed. "Oh good," he sighed. "I got nervous there. What do sunflowers stand for again?" "Adoration and loyalty," Asa replied. There was another group calling for him from the other side of the greenhouse, though. She turned, unsurprised when her eyes fell on blue irises. When she began walking toward them, she had to stop herself from laughing at the sound of Deku scrambling to follow after her. All the while, she began humming her usual morning song, letting her fingers drift over petals as she passed. The pair arrived at her blue irises a minute later, and Asa waved a hand. "You have more fans," she teased. "Faith and hope." Deku reached out and petted them, a little more confident this time. "Funny how I pick flowers that I'm similar to," he commented. She shrugged. "Most people do, they just don't realize it." He stared at the irises in consideration. After a moment, he turned his head to meet her eyes. "Which ones are you drawn most toward?" Asagao put her attention back on the flowers. That sparkly green gaze was simply too much to handle. She began selecting a few from the group for his bouquet. "These, actually. Gardenias, too, for joy. And, Asagao's. Your given name. Morning glories." Her face was burning. No way she could look at him now. She nodded. She caught sight of Deku tilting his head out of the corner of her eye. "What do they mean?" Unrequited love. Not the easiest to talk about in front of the person she felt that toward. "It's a complicated emotion," she told him. "But it's nice to have someone who understands and feels it like I do. They've always had a special place in my heart because of that." A brief silence held them captive. Asagao forced herself to meet his eyes, smiling awkwardly. Something in that green stare told her he wasn't about to push her for the truth. Deku brought the moment to an end by turning his attention back to his notebook. He scanned over what he'd written so far. "So along with being able to sustain your flowers for longer than usual with your quirk, you also hold a psycho-emotional bond with them that enables you to sense their personalities and emotions." Asa nodded, more than glad that he moved away from the previous subject. "As the bulbs take root, their life force begins to connect with mine," she explained. She headed toward the snowdrops and anemones. Deku followed suit. Once at the new section, she began gathering the flowers he'd requested and continued talking. "All specimens of flowers have the same general personality, but each one is still unique. I become more aware of them as they bloom. Once they leave my care, the life force cuts off, which is why no one else can touch them. But it's never long before one flower is replaced with another." Asa laughed fondly. "I remember I used to get really upset about it as a child, but now I'm happy that I can take care of them while I can. All flowers die eventually, after all." When she turned with the bouquet to be gathered in her arms, she found Deku staring at her in wonder. "How many flowers can you sustain at a time?" he asked. Asa leaned against the table and considered the question. I seem to max out at 500. Wow, he stammered. How, what, how did you train your quirk to be able to hold so many lives all at once?" "Over time, I guess," she shrugged. "If you build up slowly, it doesn't feel as bad. You get used to it, recharge, and keep going, just like any other quirk training. I still have days every now and then where it's more difficult, but that's just how it is, you know? Deku shook his head. That's unbelievable. You mentioned recharging, how do you do that? The two were wandering over to her wrapping station now. Asa held up a few options for paper wrapping, and Deku pointed to one with cream polka dots. She rolled it off the rack and sliced down the paper. Fresh fruit and vegetables, she replied. Asagao started to arrange the flowers, bundling them into place in a steady rhythm. I always keep a supply back here if I start feeling weak during the day. There was an oddly comfortable silence while she kept working. Deku was writing down more information, occasionally muttering to himself under his breath. She raised a curious eyebrow. Did he realize he was doing THA? I am so sorry, Tanaka sobbed. I just want to get this right, and I've been so stressed out about the whole thing. Asagao patted the fiancé on the shoulder. Akari came over with a tissue box, the look in her eyes causing Asa to have to bite her tongue to keep from laughing. Poor Tanaka-san had been in just a few weeks ago for her final selections, but she'd been back at least twice since then. The soon-to-be bride simply couldn't make up her mind on what she wanted. The shopkeeper sat back down across from her client. I think the pink roses with the baby's breath and blue lupine is going to be just perfect, Tanaka-san, Asa soothed. It matches wonderfully with the rest of your color scheme and really brings out your eyes. The woman sniffed. You think so? I really do, the florist nodded. I know this has been hard to decide, but I promise I wouldn't suggest anything ugly for your special day. Your fiancé liked the original plan too, didn't he? Tanaka took in a deep breath. Yes, he did. It's his mother, really. She's been driving me crazy, and she doesn't think the blue will match with their family's quirk. Apparently red has always been a big part of their family legacy. Asa's eyes flitted to Akari in a silent scream for help. There was no way she was about to start marital counseling right now, especially with the shop set to close in 15 minutes. Thankfully, Akari took the signal. Her employee wandered over, the sparkling radiating off of her a telltale sign of her quirk. Akari delicately flicked her wrist. Suddenly, the sample bouquet on the table in front of Tanaka was covered in a glittery sheen. It's your wedding, not hers, Akari stated gently. She looked to her boss, and Asa took the cue to place the flowers in the fiancé's shaking hands. Akari continued, he asked you to marry him, not his family's legacy. I'm sure if you talked about this with him, he'd be very supportive of you getting the flowers you like. I already have, Tanaka admitted, her eyes flitting down to the bouquet in thought. He said I should pick what I want, and that if I was happy, then so was he. Asagao found herself smiling. Sounds like he's a great guy. The fiancé wiped her tears away and laughed. He really is. Akari and Asa shared a look for a second. They'd seen this before, these were the times where the nervous bride-to-be always found her voice. Asa couldn't remember how many women she'd had in here who had stories of other people trying to control their weddings. It happened far too frequently, but she recognized a turning point when she saw one. Slowly, Tanaka's tense shoulders relaxed. She looked up at the other two women with an embarrassed smile on her face. These, she said, holding up the bouquet. I want these for my wedding. And that's that. Asa's smile grew. Awesome. I'll make a note to go back to our first plan. Do you want the sparkles, too? It's a small upcharge, but our clients who ask for them are always very happy with the result. The woman hesitated. I don't mind at all, really. Akari piped up. After a few more moments of contemplation, Tanaka finally nodded. Asa held in a sigh of relief. 2 minutes later, Tanaka was walking out of the store with a bubbly smile. As soon as the door closed behind her, the florist let out a tired puff of air. That appointment had been exhausting in more ways than one. If only she had a visit from a superhero to look forward to, but alas, it had only been 1 week since Deku's last stop by. She knew he wouldn't come for 7 more days. We really need to keep more tissues on hand, Akari noted as the two began cleaning up the client table. Asa laughed. I think I just need to keep them in my apron pockets at all times. We've had a lot of crying brides lately. Akari shook her head. Weddings are just too stressful these days. Want me to stay behind and help close up? The shopkeeper shrugged. I think I'm good. Maiko-chan already did some cleaning before she left. I swear she was going to beat me over the head with the duster if I didn't let her. Classic Maiko-chan. She never changes. The two shared a fond chuckle. Though Akari tried her best to stick around a bit longer, Asa shooed her out the front door just before the clock struck 6. She knew that the girl was going out with her boyfriend tonight, and she wasn't about to keep her from her date, especially given the perfect late June evening it was. And honestly, after the busy day she'd had, it was nice to be alone. Just her and her flowers, in the quiet, no one to bother them. Their own little world. Asa hummed a familiar tune as she went about her usual tasks. She swept the floors, wiped down the glass, drifted her fingers over the flowers asking for help. Something about the mindlessness of it all set her at ease. It was just what she needed after sitting there awkwardly for half an hour while Tanaka cried. The shop now clean, all she needed to do was turn the lights off and lock up. Asagao took off her apron and dusted away some pollen from her blouse. Purse on shoulder, keys in one hand, phone in the other, she started toward the door. See you all tomorrow, Asa called out. She vaguely heard the affirmative hums in return as she began scrolling through her notifications. Apparently Hannah had been texting her random cat videos off and on throughout the day. Shaking her head, Asagao shifted her attention to the keys. She pulled out the right one and began to reach toward the door handle. Only for her violet eyes to connect with brilliant green through the glass. Asa blinked. Her eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. She looked back at him. Deku grinned apologetically. Can we come in? He asked, his voice muffled slightly by the door. The florist's eyebrow scrunched. We? Deku gestured behind him. When her eyes followed, they fell on none other than pro-hero Shoto. The man raised his hand in a solemn wave. Wow, if only Akari hadn't just left. That girl was the biggest Shoto fan she knew. Wait a minute, why was she still just standing there? Her face flushing, Asagao finally jumped back and opened the door. Words began spilling out of Deku's mouth as they walked in. I am so sorry, I know I'm even later than usual. I wanted to get here earlier, but there was traffic, and then a villain appeared on the train, and then we had to go to the police station, and he insisted we couldn't go anywhere else, Shoto cut in dryly. Asa blinked. So they really were night and day, huh? Shoto with his calm demeanor, and Deku with his Deku-ness. She'd read about their friendship in the magazines and seen a few joint interviews, but it didn't quite compare to seeing it in real life. It was fascinating, really. Shoto was well known for being rather closed off and serious, yet Deku was practically bouncing around in his personal space like it was no big deal. Perhaps the tiny upward twitch of Shoto's lips indicated that he had simply become used to his behavior over the years. They really were best friends in real life, weren't they? Asa shook her head and forced herself to put the analysis aside. You're a week early, though, she pointed out to Deku. Did the flowers wilt already? Oh, no, not at all, he responded quickly. Todoroki-kun needed some, and I decided I'd bring him here. Said Hero shifted uncomfortably, his eyes falling to the ground. Asa frowned. She looked to Deku for an explanation. He doesn't know what to get, Deku supplied. He tried looking things up online, but it only made him more confused. I'm not confused, Shoto muttered. Simply, conflicted. Right, conflicted, Deku corrected himself. His eyes turned back to Asagao. She tried to conceal her surprise when she saw the pleading look he gave her. I knew you'd be the best person to help, so we had to come here. Asa subtly took in a deep breath and nodded. One hero every 2 weeks had honestly been enough for her. This was just overwhelming. Still, there was something in Shoto's eyes that made her panic subside. A depth of sadness she hadn't expected. She'd seen that look before, typically when people were getting flowers for a funeral. Surely she would have heard about something. Asagao nodded immediately. Of course. My lips are sealed. I don't gossip about my customers. Deku gave her a grateful smile. The two stared at Shoto for a few more seconds. Finally, he sighed. Okay. The #1 pro hero's eyes lit up. Great. Nakono-san connects with all the flowers emotionally. She'll be able to tell you exactly which ones to get. Shoto's eyes lifted to meet hers. He hesitated. I want the flowers for my mother, he said. She struggles. She's been getting better over the years, but recently she's having a hard time again. Midoriya-kun told me about his flowers, and I thought they might make a difference to her. Asagao's heart squeezed painfully. Of course this was difficult for him. It was well known that the mother of the Todoroki family was basically never seen, and hadn't been for several years. Whatever the reason, Asa couldn't imagine what it was like growing up like that. Being without your mother couldn't have been easy, as evidenced even now by how Deku placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. Swallowing hard, Asa managed a soft smile. And what do you want to say to her with the flowers? What do you want her to know? Shoto seemed to consider it for a moment. I want her to know that I don't fault her for her state. That I'm proud she's been as good of a mother as she has been. That she is strong, much stronger than she knows, even if she can't see it sometimes. The hurt in her heart eased a bit. She knew just what he needed. I'd suggest white tulips, then, Asa told him. They're often used as a way of forgiveness and to show that someone is worthy. It sounds like that's the kind of message she needs right now. Shoto's lips turned up. Her hair is white. Asa grinned and clasped her hands together. A perfect match, then. Just as she turned to head toward the back, she heard Deku whispering, "See, I told you she'd get it right." She was glad the far too pleased smile on her face was hidden. The florist set about her work in the greenhouse as quickly as possible, if only to get her mind off of the night's unexpected turn of events. Deku's lucky I was still here in the first place, she laughed to herself. And just when I thought it'd be a normal day. Of course not. The tulips were easy to put together, and once she had them bound in a pretty matching white paper, she went back to the front of the store. And she can sustain up to 500 flowers at once. It's just crazy. Deku was telling Shoto when she entered. She says all of the meanings of the flowers match their personalities, and oh, that was fast, Nakono-san. Asagao swore she was blushing from her head to her toes. Deku had been talking about her quirk in this way that she couldn't describe other than it was overwhelming and flustering, and it was just so strange to hear him talk about it like it was this amazing thing when it was nothing like what he or Shoto were capable of. They captured villains and saved lives. She just gave people flowers. Why did it seem like it was such a big deal to him? The young woman snapped out of her thoughts quickly. I didn't have to arrange them since it's just one flower type, she explained. I'm sure you managed to give Shoto-san the full rundown of my quirk in that time, though. Oh gosh, she was teasing him again, wasn't she? Deku gave her a guilty grin. Perhaps. Have you done the final step, yet? Asa shook her head as a negative. Good, he said, then turned to Shoto and elbowed him. This is my favorite part. Okay, if she wasn't red before, she certainly was now. Asa cursed the warmth flooding her cheeks, but it wasn't like she could stop it. Something about how Deku was acting made her feel like she was on an empty stage, with a spotlight on her. It was new, but not entirely unwelcome. The tulip sent her a little wave of comfort. Their encouragement helped Asa through her ritual, humming a particularly delicate tune to let the tulips know the importance of their job. She hadn't realized she'd closed her eyes until they opened, and she handed the bouquet over to its new owner, who took it readily. They're beautiful, Shoto inclined his head. I can see now why Midoriya-kun insisted we come to you. Asa smiled gently. I hope your mother gets better soon. She has a son that cares for her. I'm sure that means the world to her. Shoto's eyes widened a bit. To the side, Asa caught sight of Deku mouthing thank you. The transaction took place in an almost reverent silence. She caught Deku quietly saying something to Shoto about stopping by a hospital, to which Shoto nodded. One formal bow of thanks from Shoto later, the two started toward the front door. Shoto stepped out of the shop first, but before Deku could follow, he turned back around and waved. See you next week, Nakono-san. Deku shouted happily. I'll be on time, I promise. Asa didn't want him to leave. Why didn't she want him to leave? Maybe because they hadn't. Her heart was racing. Those stupid beautiful eyes always threw her off. Why you'd better not bring the entire superhero world to my shop, Asa teased. I'm busy enough with wedding season as it is. A sudden laugh burst from Deku's lips. I can't help it, my flowers have been getting lots of compliments. I tell everyone who asks to come here, he told her. Oh wow, his eyes were sparkling again. Their usual glow had died down during his time there, most likely due to the seriousness of Shoto's request. To see them shine again took Asa's breath away. She shook her head, amused. You should take a few business cards with you, if you're serious. A grin lit his face. Before she knew it, Deku had dashed up to her counter. It was with an almost a childish glee that he scooped up at least a dozen cards. I'll be passing these out like candy, he winked. Deku winked. At her. Asa's heart stuttered. In a flash, he was back at the door. Deku waved again, flashing the business cards in his hand cheekily, before he skipped down the sidewalk to an awaiting Shoto. Asa went to bed that night thinking she must have made it all up. The next week of her life was strange, to say the least. Well, it hadn't been at first. Sure, she'd been constantly questioning if her memory was correct, that wink, but business happened as usual. Until 2 days after her visit from Deku and Shoto, that is. At the moment, Asagao found herself staring at none other than Eraserhead. Not only that, but he had a teenage girl with him. The girl tugged on his sleeve. What about those, Dad? Those are pretty. You can get whichever ones you want, Eraserhead replied. Who? His voice wasn't as monotone as it usually sounded in the interviews. Or maybe he was just different around his daughter. Weird, Asa figured she would have known Eraserhead had a daughter. Every Deku fan knew who he was, much to the chagrin of the underground hero. He probably hadn't anticipated having students that drew so many eyes. The florist cleared her throat. She'd been walking around with the pair since they came in, answering all the rapid-fire questions Eri asked. Peach roses are very sincere, she told them. They're pretty popular right now, and would be beautiful with the white carnations you were looking at earlier. Eraserhead's eyes turned to her. You make custom bouquets? He inquired. Asa nodded. If I have it and she wants it, I can put together anything. Upon hearing this, Ai gave her father a pleading look. I like what she said, she told him. Suddenly, her eyes flicked away. If that's okay. We came here just for you, Ai, the hero replied, his hand reaching up to ruffle her hair a bit. 10 minutes later, Asa found her heart warming as she watched them leave. Ai was hugging her flowers tight, and Eraserhead was smiling at her softly. There really was more to heroes than the public knew, wasn't there? And then it only got stranger. It's too much, isn't it? Asagao looked up into the blushing face of pro-hero Chargebolt and smiled. I don't think it's too much, at all. Any girl would be lucky to receive these. He breathed a sigh of relief. Okay, if you think so. The florist swore she heard Maiko and Akari stifling their giggles as she passed the absolutely massive bouquet of purple irises over to the pro-hero. The poor man had walked in over an hour ago, and when she'd set the catalogue in front of him, she thought he was about to have a heart attack. The only thing he knew he wanted was purple, but even with that specification, the selection process took him ages. As she ran his credit card, Chargebolt looked the flowers over, grinning widely. "I know my Kyoko's gonna love them," he told Asa. "She's not a girly girl, but the purple totally goes with her vibes. And I like the meaning, too." Asa chuckled. "Like I said, she's very lucky." "I think I'm the lucky one," he replied with a shake of his head. "I don't know how she deals with a total dunce like me." Okay, she definitely just heard a snort from Akari. Ignoring it, Asagao handed the card back over. A real dunce wouldn't buy his girlfriend flowers just because, the florist pointed out. His face was flushing again, but Chargebolt shrugged. "Maybe. Thanks a bunch, though. Midoriya-kun was right about you. You were super helpful." Asa's heart skipped a beat. Deku had been talking about her? Really? The pro-hero stumbled out the door a minute later. The moment he was gone, Maiko and Akari finally let loose their laughter. Asa threw a well-aimed rose at them. "I'm still not used to this," Akari whispered. Maiko hummed, "I doubt we ever will be." Their boss tossed them a look to let them know she'd heard. Then, she turned her attention back to the hero in front of her. "So you just want sunflowers?" Uravity nodded. "At least a dozen. No wrapping or anything, I'm gonna put them in a vase right away." Asagao motioned for one of her employees to go grab the flowers. Akari slipped on a pair of gloves and disappeared into the back. "That'll be 2532, Asa told the hero. Uravity handed over cash with a sparkle in her eyes. "I really am so excited that I could finally stop by," she said. "This place is just as cute as Deku-kun said, and so are you." The florist's breath caught. "Wait, what?" "He said he connected a lot with the sunflowers here, so I thought I'd get him some," Uravity chattered on obliviously. "He's never decorated his office at the agency, and I've been trying to get him to do it for ages, but he always says he's too busy." "I mean, I guess he is, but that's still no excuse." In a matter of seconds, Asagao felt her heart go from soaring to hollow. She pushed through, slapping a smile on her face until the anti-gravity hero had skipped out the door. The second she left, Asa told Maiko and Akari she needed a break. Asa flopped down on the greenhouse floor next to her Asagao's. She bit into an apple frustratedly. Funny how little it took to send her emotions into a tizzy. She had almost forgotten the eternal question of whom Deku was getting the flowers for. But now, with Uravity in the shop getting flowers for him, were all those magazines right? They had dated in high school. And she could see some of the flower meanings he wanted applying to Uravity. Violet eyes dragged over to the morning glories on her left. They whispered a sweet apology. They knew how she felt better than anyone, after all. Asa let out a sigh. Tomorrow was Tuesday. Had the week really passed so quickly? She supposed she had been rather caught up in all the chaos of her strange new clientele, but for the first time since all this began, Asagao found that she wasn't too thrilled about seeing Deku tomorrow. Thank you all for watching this video. Check out the maker of the fanfic down below and goodbye.